Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the New Construction Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Anya Chrysanthon, and I'm very excited to introduce my guest for today. Cory is with ApostleTech, and Cory Charles, what he does is his official title is the Education and Creative Manager. So to give you a little bit of an idea of what that means is Cory is responsible for bringing the cutting edge sales training. And today we're really going to get into sales training and how it's different from the old school. So welcome to the show, Cory. Thank you so much for being here today. And
Anya, thank you so much for having me. And that's an amazing introduction, by the way.
Well, thank you. So Cory and I had a chance to actually meet in person at this year's IBS. So how many times have you ever been to IBS before?
So that was actually my first trip to IBS. It was a lot to take in, but it was amazing to see what we can do as an industry.
Yes, that was my first time too. So that was so much fun. All right. So Cory, if you don't mind starting us off by giving us a little bit of background intro on yourself, how did you get into this wonderful world of sales training and what your career progression has been?
Absolutely. If you have a minute, my story is kind of like a Tarantino movie. It's got a lot of ups and downs and twists and turns. I come from a very traditional family, so I was one of those where at age of 18 and you graduate high school, the clock is ticking. And matter of fact, my father used to stop by my room every morning and look at his watch, like basically telling me it's time to get on the road. So I did like most kids did, just trying to find my way. I got into school. I started with graphic design, of all things. And going into graphic design, I did it for two reasons. I was pretty good in art in general. And at the time, graphic designers were making pretty good money, just to be honest with you. And wasn't too long as I started the program and started going through school, something kind of felt off. And at that time, I needed to start working as well, because just like anybody else, you're in college, you need to make money. And I picked up a job at a little place called CarMax in car sales, which was totally out of my norm. Matter of fact, I tell the story all the time. My parents, when I told them I was going into car sales, they laughed. They thought it was the funniest thing in the world. I don't know what more confidence you can get from your parents. So I really just kind of fell into it by accident as something I needed to be able to work a small amount of time, make a lot of money, and still go through school, not affect my course load. And it's something that I just fell in love with immediately. It was amazing. But for me, being a natural introvert, it wasn't something that came naturally at all. I had to do a lot of work. I had to read a lot. I had to watch a lot of videos. I had to study a lot of other salespeople. And it's something that I had to work at to get better. And I was lucky enough also that I had a really great mentor. And that's something that they did really well. They had an amazing mentoring program. And just going through that mentoring program, I understood that there's a different feel. For me, it was more about how can I empower the next generation of salespeople? How can I get people to the next level? So fast forward, we have an economic downturn later. And the goal for me was always to get into the new home industry. That was always, for me, my target once I started to build up some steam. And once I moved over to the new home sales arena, same thing. I knew that I had to start from scratch and learn the industry and learn the business and learn everything that it took to be successful in the industry. And I did just like I did before, a lot of trainings, a lot of coachings, all the materials that you could think of to try to build up that steam. But one of the things I noticed is a lot of the trainings out there were the same material, whether it was the car business, whether it was new home sales, whether it's timeshare. A lot of it was the same information, maybe recycled, respinned a little bit, and it was delivered in the same way. And knowing that I wanted to be a trainer one day, and that was always the goal, I made myself a promise that if I got to that position, I would never deliver the same information in the same way. So that was always my goal. I was fortunate enough to work for a national home builder and then make the move over to Taylor Morrison, which is where I called home for over 5 years. And I sold there on the floor and then was given the opportunity to become the national sales trainer for Taylor Morrison.
Great company.
Absolutely. Fantastic company, fantastic people. And it was truly eye-opening because instead of thinking of my little world of sales, I got a chance to see the big picture and see across the country. Salespeople are dealing with a lot of the same issues, some new, some different, but there was a really big lack for ongoing, different, unique training across the globe. And that's where ApostleTech came in and gave me this beautiful opportunity to impact people on a larger level.
Love it. So, what stands out to me is that there a lot of salespeople out there are natural salespeople. Like you hear them say, like, when I was born, like I knew right away, like I wanted to be, or like I was super outgoing. So with you, hearing you say that not only you're an introvert, but also that it didn't necessarily come naturally to you at first, and that you spend the time doing the research and studying, that really stands out to me because I really appreciate that. I am also, and people are always shocked when I say I'm an introvert too. I guess I'm like an extroverted introvert. But yeah, same thing with me. And, it's almost like people think that in order to be good at sales, you are or you're not, which I think is completely not true. I think
Absolutely.
You can definitely teach somebody to be great at sales. There is something to the natural drive that you need to have in order to be a successful salesperson. I think that you cannot teach, and you either have it or you don't. You're either hungry or you're not. But as far as sucking at sales and then working on it to get yourself better and better, that I strongly believe in. So with your sales program, you kind of branded it as SalesOlogy. So tell us a little bit about SalesOlogy. What is the the doctrine behind it? How is it different from the traditional sales that you've been exposed to your whole career?
Well, I'll tell you first, the whole thought process behind SalesOlogy is if you look at 98.5% of the sales training materials out there, it's all about how to sell a buyer, how to convince them to buy, how to make them make a buying decision. I remember coming from the car business, it was all about who's the best closer and who could convince the most people. Which I learned really quickly is not something that's sustainable, especially when you look at a purchase such as a new home. It's a totally different ballgame. So most of the training is about how to sell people, and I think I look at it as not so much how can I sell someone, but how can I understand someone's situation and hopefully point them in the right direction to help them make a decision. Because one way or another, they're going to make a buying decision. My job is to help them make the right buying decision. Not necessarily how can I convince them to buy, because especially when we talk about a home, chances are they're going to buy a home. I just want to make sure that they're buying the right home for their situation. So it's not so much about how to sell. It's more about why people buy and how people buy is the whole idea around SalesOlogy. So
it's more of a psychology, I guess, behind how people make a decision to buy. So I think there's definitely been a huge shift with the way people buy over the last, say, decade. Right. So, and the way people buy now versus 10 years ago. So now I think we're in an era of, empowered and educated buyer. Is what I would describe them as, right? It's almost to the point where when you have somebody walking through your model home, they know exactly what model home they want. They know exactly which options they want. And they're there to kind of take a look to make sure that what they saw on the website is confirmed and that they feel comfortable moving forward. Versus in the past, it's been the salesperson was really the distributor of the information and in many cases manipulator of the information, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before, I always look at our business and sales in general as pre and post internet. I think that is the big difference. And before, we were, like you said, we were the gatekeepers of information, and a customer came in and they got the information that we allowed them to have. So put us in a really good position of power, which, good or bad, but it gave us a different, the ability to have a different approach in the sales process. We didn't have to emphasize on creating that great customer experience. It wasn't necessarily about what the buyer wanted and needed. It was more about what information do I give you and when, and how is it going to help me make the sale? Whereas, like you said, today our buyers come in and I call them, they're savvy. There are savvy buyers. And I used to say that they have information at the touch of a finger. It's even more so. Now they can just talk to their phone and it will give them
hey
all
Siri, right?
They don't even need to touch it anymore. So, in this age where people have so much information, and in a lot of cases, if you're not up to speed, they may know more than you do about your product, which is a really scary thing. And they want what they want, and they want it right now. It's kind of that whole Amazon society, right? People want what they want, and they want it quickly, and they want it right now, and they want you to get out of the way so they can get it done as fast as possible. So we really have to adjust how we look at the sales process. It has to change before we get Amazoned.
Yes. So yeah, I love what you said about you getting out of the way, because I think a lot of the times salespeople really are standing in the way of sales, right? So especially these days when the consumer is ready, willing, and able, you don't necessarily need to go through the 11 steps of the sales process to close them. Skip that. They're ready to go. Give them what they want. Move on. So let's talk about some of the differences of selling in the past to selling now. So sales conversations, so insight selling. So what do you mean by that?
So I think what I think is really important. It's just like I said before, our buyers come in, and we've always been taught, I've been in sales for, over 15 years now. And since day one, I've been taught that your buyers want information. They want as much information as possible. And that's your job. Give them information so they can make a buying decision. And the reality is they have that information now. So I think what the buyer's not looking for is information. What they're looking for is insight. They're looking for the information that's beyond the obvious. What can they not find? And that's where you really have to be an expert on your brand, on your community, on your everything, your whole entire process. You have to give them information that Siri's not going to be able to pull up in, a drop of a hat. And you have to be able to tell a great story on why the buyer's making this decision or why this is the right decision for their buyer. But to do that, you also have to understand your buyer, which is a whole nother topic where we have to, instead of, which traditionally customer walks in, I tell them about myself for 30 minutes. And if they're still awake, then we can talk about them, right? And I think we really have to turn that on its head, where it's more about the buyer, and I need to get that information from the buyer, and then we can discuss how we move forward.
Yes, I agree with you. Absolutely. So you bring up a great point here. So it's all about knowing your buyer and give them the insight beyond what they already know. And that's where storytelling comes in. So we have addressed storytelling in the past on this podcast, but I love that you incorporate that. And the key with storytelling is to make it relevant to your buyer, of course.
Absolutely.
Again, you don't want to make a story about yourself and go on and on and on. You want to make it relevant to your buyer and paint the picture of how other buyers maybe overcame that specific concern that this buyer has, or something along those lines. So, all right, excellent. So next point you made was the value-centric selling. So position your value, not your price.
So this is one, and to go back to your previous point, this is something that we do as well as salespeople. We are conditioned to just give out as much information as possible, right? Mm-hmm. And we talk to our buyers and we tell them this information, whether it's relevant to them or not, we give them this information. And as salespeople, once we hit that wall, then we realize we need to change. And the good ones hopefully understand that it needs to be more about that story. But to tell a good story and to tell the right story for your buyer, you have to understand your buyer. buyer. And once you understand your buyer, now when I flip it back on the other side and story time's over and I'm talking about my features or what I have to offer, now I can talk about it in a way that's relevant to the customer, to the buyer, in a way that makes sense and hits their hot buttons and is important to them, versus me talking about something that doesn't matter at all, which is what a lot of salespeople do, right?
Yes, a lot of salespeople love to talk, and once they open their mouth, it's like you can't get them to shut up, And it's like,
oh yeah, forget about it.
Like spewing information out, and it's like, dude, no.
Exactly.
Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear you talk. So yeah, I think it's a tough one, especially for new salespeople. Yes. I think new salespeople fall into that trap a lot. And once you become a little bit more experienced, you know that, yes, this is the information I need to deliver and share, but the way I'm going to do it is by customer cues, right?
Yes.
If they give me a cue that, hey, we're really environmentally conscious, and, we recycle and we have a composter, now may be a good time to share your building green practices and how your energy program is going to not only save the money, but also the environment. So
absolutely.
It's a way to tie it in, but the key is to listen to those cues, because if you're too busy spewing the information out, chances are you're going to miss those cues.
Yes. Well, and the reason why that happens is because, again, especially like you said, for the newer counselors and newer consultants, where that catalog of information may not be there yet, that well of things they can pull from, they go back to default, which is either A, I'm just going to spit product knowledge at you, or I'm going to go back to my script that I was given.
Yep.
It always goes back to the script. And a lot of times we're talking about a script, and A, it's not in our language, and B, it doesn't resonate with the customer. So It's wasted words.
Yes. So what's the good way to snap out of it? Like if you catch yourself going down that rabbit hole of I'm talking more than my customer's talking, but I don't want to have that awkward silence. So what's the good, maybe is it, to interject and ask a question? What would you recommend if somebody's going down that hole?
So for me, I was always big on questions. I think if you ask the right question in the right place, you can learn a ton of information from your buyer. Mm-hmm. We were very stuck on having this list of questions that we need to ask. And they're very specific. They're very, how many bedrooms are you looking for? What's your square footage? What's your price range? And they're very specific questions. And yes, they'll get us the information that we need, but it doesn't really let the customers tell their story. So I'm big on those open-ended questions. I want them to just spill the guts and tell me exactly what's going on in their world. Mm-hmm. And that will help me paint the picture of where we need to start looking.
So how do we get them to spill the guts?
They got to trust you first, right? I think one of the biggest things is a buyer, especially today's buyer, and we're seeing it increase more and more, a buyer can sense when a sales pitch is coming. Mm-hmm. And once that sales pitch is coming, it's not even something they're doing consciously. It's that reptilian brain, right? It triggers and it says, oh, sales pitch, I know where this is going, and they shut down. And once that switch is flipped, it's very hard for us to get them back to a loose conversational place. Mm-hmm. Then we're kind of fighting an uphill battle. It's not impossible, but it becomes way more difficult, and it makes our sales process harder. So I find that if we spend more time up front, getting to know the customer, talking to the customer, not heavy on the sales side, just really building that rapport, building that relationship, mm-hmm. those questions will answer themselves organically mm-hmm. without us ever flipping that trigger for the customer.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. So, and obviously, as a salesperson, to be successful, you do need to ask for the sale. But in order to ask for the sale, you do have to earn that trust and the right to ask for the sale. And then, a lot of people struggle with building the urgency. So it's at the end of at the end of the time, you're sensing the customer's ready to go. Then suddenly you're like, oh, and by the way, this promo ends tomorrow, and and you start doing all those things as to why they need to buy today. So yeah, definitely. It's just like building rapport naturally. You also need to figure out a way to naturally sprinkle a little bit of, scarcity into the conversation and do it in a way that feels natural, that it's not, to scare somebody off. But it's like, hey, I'm being transparent with you. This is what we have and this is what's going on. So I think that takes practice, and not everyone is that great at it. So, but people who are, I have a friend who is like, you would never think of her as a salesperson. The way she is with customers is just so sweet and so, non-threatening, but she's a freaking shark. Like the way she does it, it's amazing. And like, you'd never seen it coming because she does it so naturally. Like you don't even think you're being sold where she has you wrapped around her finger.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, it's not even that she's trying to make it seem natural. It just is natural.
Yeah.
We have to go back to where talking to a customer is just a conversation. We build it up too much where it is this almost like we treat it like it's a ballet where I go, then you go, and it's a dance. And really, it's just a conversation. It's just like talking to people. And if we can break it down to the simplest parts of just talking to people, even for introverts like you and I, it becomes much easier thing to do, much less complicated into going to the sales process.
Perfect. So your next point, I think we talked a little bit about this already, but inside the customer's brain. So we know that the customers are already informed, they know what they want. So it comes down to really, how do you position the product for them and make it better? So, what do you recommend in this case? Like, how do you get to that without asking them a million annoying questions?
Yeah, and I love that you said without asking a million annoying questions, because that's one of my pet peeves, right? Because when a customer comes in, I always imagine what it feels like for the customer. They walk into your sales center and the lights dim and the spotlight shines on their face. And then we drill them with 150 questions because those are the questions that we need answered. And it's not about the buyer at all. And that automatically sets them back on their heels. But I really need to understand, other than those surface level questions, square footage and bedroom count, I need to know the deep stuff. I need to know the stuff that's going on under the surface, because that's why they're making the buying decision. It's rarely because of bedroom count, right? It's because of something else. And I need to know what that is. And to understand what that is, I have to get inside the buyer's head. I have to be inside their mind. And I have to ask a lot of really good questions. And sometimes I have to ask personal questions, which for some salespeople is uncomfortable. But if you imagine yourself as a doctor and you're prescribing the right home for this buyer, you got to ask uncomfortable questions sometimes. That's just a part of what we do. But my goal is to make sure that every person that walks through the door makes the right buying decision for their family. And to do that, I have to know as much as I can about them.
So it's getting to that why.
Yes.
Right. So yeah. And once you know what is the reason, then you have a strong motivator. And you can figure out, like, is it strong enough of a motivator for them to move or not to move? But
for sure.
Yeah, you can sell them on all the features, but you're selling them on the wrong features. You're not getting to the why. It's going to be very difficult to close that deal. So, all right. Next thing you said is blocking objections. So what's the difference between blocking objections versus overcoming objections?
I love that you said that. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. And I'm not saying that we don't, of course we need to learn how to overcome objections because they're important. And objections are a good thing. That's part of the process. But I think what happens is, especially, I talk a lot about the psychology and what's going on inside the buyer's head. Once someone states an objection out loud and they make it public and they take a stand, it's very hard to change that person's mind. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. So my job is, especially as a salesperson, and I'm in the same sales center, I'm hearing typically a lot of the same things. So I should know what my top 5 objections are. I should automatically know that, hey, I'm going to hear these 5 objections. How do I respond to these objections in different ways for different buyers? So I can get out in front of it before it becomes public, right? Because again, once the buyer states a fact, if the buyer says, I don't want to live here because of X, it's going to be very hard to change their mind. If I can get out in front of it and spin it either to a positive or make other points that are good outweigh that one point, then it's going to be less likely that the buyer will bring it up and use it against me. So I definitely think that we need to understand what are the things that we're hearing constantly, whether it's in our community or whatever else it is, and get really good at finding a way to bring those up ahead of time and get out in front of those objections.
So I used to, when I would come to a new community, I used to write down, like when I would hear somebody say an objection when you're first starting out, I would write it down, and then I would do like crazy research on it, and I would try to come up with different solutions for that, so that next time it comes up and you're not like caught like a deer in a headlights, you know, like, so, okay. So you're saying take it a step beyond that. Not only you need to know the objections and the, how to overcome them, but you're saying almost like sprinkle that into your sales presentation, talk about it in a way that addresses it, but maybe kind of overcomes it ahead of time before it becomes an objection. Is that
absolutely. Because what's happening in our sales process, especially with buyers having so much information, when they're looking at 3, 4, 5, 10 different models, at some point they're just trying to eliminate the competition and get down to a smaller list. So sometimes they throw out these objections to either clear the deck or push us back on our heels. So if I can address it and move on and stop and see if it's a deal breaker or not, because the buyer will tell you, wait, hang on, that's not okay. Then we can address it. That's when we go back to overcoming the objection. But if I can take as many off the plate as possible up in front of it, it's going to make my job so much easier. I always say if a buyer comes in and their complaint is, we're really close to a highway, how can you spin that to make it sound great for your commute to work, or getting in and out of the airport if you travel? Where is that going to be a positive for that buyer? If it's a deal breaker, then we need to address it and maybe move on. But if not, let's get out in front of it and move on with our lives.
Yes, love it. And I think some people, salespeople, are still scared of objections, right? When we hear that word, it's like, it's like somebody sticking their stick into your wheels, stuffing it. But it's very important that you talk through it, because guess what? If you don't address it with your buyer, whether through natural flow of conversation, overcoming it, or them bringing up an actual objection to you and you talking through it, guess what's going to happen? They're going to go home and they're going to share that objection with their friends, their family. And what do you think their friends and family are going to do? Oh yeah, I would never live next to a highway, right?
Exactly.
No,
everyone has an opinion.
That's a deal breaker for me. Right?
Everyone has their opinion on what they would and wouldn't do when it's not their decision, right?
Yes.
So I think we can't be afraid of the objections that we're going to get. And I did that too. I'm guilty of it. And I think most of us are, when we know whether, I have that power line right over my model, or there's a train running through every day at 12 o'clock and we run from it. And listen, the buyers know those things are there. So us running from it doesn't help us. And in fact, if we give them the power to use it against us, now we're fighting a battle that we don't want to fight. I'm going to own it, and let's just talk about it. And if you're okay with it, I'm okay with it. Let's keep going.
Love it. Okay. So another point you bring is no pressure. Clients don't want to be pressured into buying, but you can learn to nudge them. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my favorite things to talk about, I probably talk about it too much, is the ability to influence. Not just buyers, but to influence conversations. I always give a warning in my trainings. I say, anything you learn here, don't use it against your spouse. And then angry letters, I don't want it, right?
Love it.
But we do have the ability to guide people to a destination that we want. We have the ability to guide a conversation in a way that we want it to. We do it all the time. We just don't always recognize it. If we're talking to a group of friends and we're trying to decide what movie to watch, we know where we want that solution to be, and we're trying to steer the conversation. We can do that without pushing our buyers. We can gather information about what they want, what they need, and understanding how to as salespeople, ask the right questions so the buyer can kind of lay down their own bricks in front of their path and kind of walk themselves to where they want to be. Because again, if I give you the idea, there's going to be resistance. But if you come up with the idea yourself, everyone's happy, right?
Yes.
So my goal is, I know as a sales expert, I've gathered all your information. I know exactly what's going on in your world. I know why we're making that move, why it's so important. I know what I think is going to be the best solution for you. My job, where it gets a little fun, is I don't want to just flat out tell you, because now it's me selling it to you, right? I want to help you come to that conclusion on your own. And now it's as simple as, now it's never a sales process. It's two friends talking and, hey, let's put a bow on this thing.
Mm-hmm. Love it. So I definitely believe in urgency, right? I mean, I think if buyers don't have the urgency, they're just, they're not going to make a decision, whether it's buying that pair of shoes or a home. I think it is trickier with the home just because, it's a big purchase, but nonetheless, it's that FOMO that we have, right? The fear of missing out, that's alive and well. And so I think you do have to practice and figure out a way to sprinkle that urgency to almost have them come to the conclusion themselves, like what's gonna happen, versus you doing a hard sell, hard pressure situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very blessed that one of my first mentors, when I started to pick up some skills and I started to get a little bit craftier, I probably read too many books. I was with a trainee, and I had a trainee going along with me, and I was so excited because I picked up all these cool closing skills, and I thought I was, top dog. And I went through my sales process, and the manager pulled us both aside and looked at the new hire and said, "Hey, so what do you think?" And the new hire says, "Wow, he's really good." And of course, I'm like, little introverted Cory. I'm like, "Yeah, that's right. Did you hear that? I'm good." So, I'm up on my high horse. I'm so excited. And the manager pulls me aside and he says, "You're looking at it the wrong way. If a new hire tells you that you're good, it's because they don't think they can do what you can do." He said, "The reality is, I want someone to go with you and say, that's it. That's easy. I can do that, because that's duplicatable." So once I shifted from trying to be the best closer to making my process as simple as possible, it made things so much easier for me. Number one, less cancellations.
Yes.
Which was so much easier. And then understanding that if I look at urgency on two different levels, number one, I firmly believe in creating urgency. I think it's what takes those buyers that are kind of teetering on the fence, and it gives them a little nudge, if we do it tactfully, of course. And then I think there's another kind of urgency that is internal, that the buyer already has. It's our job, though, to be those investigators and find out what that urgency is. Mm-hmm. A great example I always give is, whether it's in the car business, whether it's in new home sales, whether it's timeshare, whether you're selling hot air balloons, whatever it is, when a buyer goes into a new home community or a car dealership, they know for a fact that someone's going to try to sell them. That is not a mystery.
Right.
So the reality is, it wasn't enough to stop them from going there in the first place. So on some level, there's urgency to get them there. It's my job to figure out what it is. What pushed you over the limit that made you say, "You know what, I got to go look today." And once I can figure out what made you get up and decide to go into my model, once I figure out that motivator, then we just got to live in that space for a little bit. Yeah. And if we can live in that space and kind of, we talk about it, we amp it up a little bit, they're going to push themselves over the edge. And then I always have my backup plan, right?
Love that. And I used to always tell myself, like when I would sit in the model home, is that they clearly want to buy a house. Like, they are here to buy a house. So, all I have to do is just sell them a house. So it makes it so much easier, because you're like, okay, we're on the same page. We're in the same team. We're working for the same cause. I'm just here to help you make this process as easy as possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we have to kind of readjust how we look at it as well. I don't think the cashier at Target sees a customer walking in and thinks they're just looking. they're assuming that that person's there to buy something. And if we can look at our own process that way, that customer walks in the door, they're here to buy something. It's my job to help them figure out what that is. Then we don't get into that internal struggle of, do I ask, do I not ask, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not like, oh, they're just looking, you know.
I don't believe in that.
That's always the answer you get. So
exactly.
All right. So let's talk about the next thing. So sales presence. So engage and connect.
So I think this is something that is, it takes a little bit of practice, like you said before, but one of the things we do, and I always go back to this, is, you know, as a salesperson, you're either, you walk in, here's your first day, they give you a binder and they say good luck, or it's, hey, come to this class, here's the script that we want you to recite, and you need to memorize this script or you're fired, right? And we get so caught up in either A, memorizing that script and getting it right, or having no training at all, that we just go back to what you said before. We just go back to just dumping information, because if I get lost, I can just start dumping information. Yeah. But I think if we can understand ourselves as salespeople, it helps us package a better presentation, and it helps us package a better conversation for our customers. I use myself as an example. You know, you put me a couple of years ago, you put me in a group of 5 people, and I'm not going to say 2 words. And now give me 100 people and it's not enough, right? So, but that takes time. And I think that we need to understand that everyone's sales process is different. So I can't give, you know, every person in the world my speech. It's just not going to be the same. Mm-hmm. I think everyone as a salesperson has to understand their own personality, and it needs to come out in their presentation. That's where you get down to it being genuine. That's where you get down to it being a real conversation, that the customer never feels like you're selling. Because if I'm focused on my script, especially if my competitors are using the same script, the customer's triggers are going to fire immediately. Like, I've heard that before. Here comes the sales process. So now anything else I say is in question, whether it's part of the process or not. And I really never want that trigger to go. I just want it to be a conversation. So talking about the sales presence, it's, how do you take I like to say I take my own personality when I'm talking to a customer and I crank it up a couple notches, right? So I'm a little bit extra of myself. And extra, I had a little extra. Not too much, just a little bit. I had a great trainer that says, hey man, you like to have fun. You like to joke around with people. Let that come out in your presentation. Let it be you. And I realized that was a big difference for me as a salesperson, is being able to have fun with people and give little kids high fives and joke around with people and just be more natural. Now, that's not going to be everyone, but it's all about understanding who you are as a salesperson, so we can then figure out how you can package that in a presentation.
Love that. So now let's talk about something that, you know, we talk about connecting with the customer, and we're talking about how important it is to build that trust in order to ask for the sale and all those things. But how do you, you know, because there's like a fine line between being a professional and being a friend to your customer. Because I've seen where salespeople go over to the other side and they're, you know, maybe a little too friendly, and they become a little too buddy-buddy. So what are your thoughts on, like, just how friendly do you need to become with your customer? And is there a danger of crossing into that friend zone?
Absolutely. I love that you said friend zone, first of all, but absolutely there is a danger. And it feels like you're talking about my entire career, because I did a lot of swings, you know, back and forth. And I made this mistake. Once I realized that was my angle, I went way too far to one side, and it was just about being the buddy. And that's when, as a salesperson, you start to hear things like, you're great, you're awesome, we're going to buy down the road, but we loved you. And that's where you realize that you've become way too conversational, way too, you're in that friend zone, right? Which we all know is you can't escape from. You're there forever. I think we have to be able to dance in and out of being able to be loose and friendly and kind and understanding the customer, but also never lose that edge of being the expert. And so this is where I pair having a lot of fun, joking around with my customers with insane product knowledge. And if I can tie those two things together, in the middle of our joking around, having fun, I'm still showing you that I'm the expert and you're with the right person, and I'm going to be able to point you in the right direction and put you in exactly the situation that you need to be. So I never take my thumb off of that, off of that button there, to make sure they understand that I'm still the expert. We're still friends and stuff, but it can be very dangerous, especially when we come across customers that are just like us.
Yes.
That's where we can really go off the rails. But we have to
especially if you do sell them and something goes wrong in the sales process, that could be very, very bad when you're in the friend zone, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we definitely have to keep an eye out for that. And you'll know the warning signs when, you've been with a customer and you've been talking to them for 3 hours and no one's mentioned the word house. We've probably gone a little too far, right? So it's definitely a delicate game, but I never want to lose that expertise. I never want to lose that feeling of being the subject expert.
Yes. And it's all about how you carry yourself, how you present yourself, from the way you talk, from the tone of your voice, to the way you dress, the way you walk and talk. So you guys, I wish you could see Cory right now. He's all dapper. And he's like, oh, you know what? This is just my everyday. So you definitely got to check out. I'll post this video on YouTube. So you got to check him out. He's very, very nicely put together. So
thank you so much.
Well, Cory, I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your passion for the modern sales process. If somebody wants to connect with you and learn more about your process, what's the best way to do that?
So the best way, if you go to ApostleTech.com, you can get to the SalesOlogy site, and you can do inquiries through there. That's definitely going to be the best way to contact me, and of course through all the social media channels. I'm on all of them, just preaching the word. Yes.
All right. And a question for you, since you're a book geek for sales, what is your favorite book on sales?
So my favorite book, it's funny because it's kind of it's not really a true sales book, but I think every salesperson's read it. Who Moved My Cheese is just I
have not. I'm sorry. It says who what?
Who Moved My Cheese?
Who Moved My Cheese?
I'm excited that I stumped you on that one.
No, I've never heard of this book.
So it's really just a book about change, and I won't get into the whole thing. I don't want to spoil it for you, but it's basically about these two mice that are in a maze, and they follow the maze every day to get their cheese, and one day the cheese is gone, and what do you do, and how do you react to your cheese being gone? And it's really just about understanding that in life, really, but especially in this industry, change is going to happen all the time, and how do you just roll with the punches, and how do you adapt to that change, and how do you just keep your head on straight and keep on moving? Love it.
All right, you guys, so we're all got to pick up a copy of Who Moved My Cheese, and never heard of it. So
I hope I get kickbacks for that.
Yeah, I love reading books, and when I say reading, I listen to books all the time. So I'm definitely going to check that one out next, and especially if it's like change management, how to deal with change, because you're so right. It's constant, and if you're not staying on top of it and ahead of it, and you're not comfortable with change, chances are you're not going to be real successful, whether it's sales or really anything else in this crazy world. So
absolutely, it'll run you over.
Yes. And Cory, if somebody wants to see you live, are you doing any conferences, presentations? What's coming up for you over the next few months?
So the schedule coming up for the next couple months is pretty busy. Going to be in with a lot of different builders. So some of these folks will see me and they don't know it yet, which is exciting. Really just working on as much content as possible. We're getting the website built. The website is ready to go, but we're just working on expanding the content, whether it's videos, blog postings, articles. So just trying to build up as much as possible before the schedule gets really, really, really crazy. And then hopefully you'll see me at some of these conferences coming up.
Awesome. Well, I certainly can't wait to see you face to face again. Thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been my pleasure to have you on, and I hope we get to catch up soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.